back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering people through storytelling and education. If you did not listen to last week's episode, go back and take a listen. I have Dr. Dan on. He's from the Parenting Footprint, and he is a psychologist. He's been doing work with family and kids for years, and we just have such a great conversation. I ask him lots of questions because I don't know what I'm doing. Let's be honest. I haven't been parenting really. I feel like when you have a kid under a year old, it's just meeting their biological needs. I feel like I'm starting to parent a little bit. There's, Jovi will bite or hit, and it's like, hey, be gentle. And just learning that we have to show them and model for them and do all of that. So it's the beginning of my parenting journey. And I know that there's going to be so many things that come up and I have zero idea what to do. So I ask him a lot of questions. He's so knowledgeable. So make sure that you guys go back and listen to that episode. I am so excited about today's episode with Taylor Kulik. She's a holistic sleep coach, and I've been sharing my troubles the last couple of months with Jovi's sleep. But it's just so nice to hear another perspective with anything. There's no one size fits all. So I don't know why all these things are packaged to new parents as one size fits all. Like, this is what you need to do for your kid and they're going to sleep and this is how it's going to work. And if you do A, B, and C, all these things are going to align and they'll be fine. But that's just not reality for most people. There is no one size fits all. There is no one way of doing things. All of our kids are different. They have different needs. We're different. We have different needs and different things work for us. So I'm really excited about my conversation with her. I'm going to share her Instagram and all of the links in the show notes. She's somebody that I've really enjoyed following because it's made me feel normal. It's made me feel like Jovi's normal, like that I'm not failing her as a mom, that what she's going through is normal, that what we're doing is fine, that there's some things that don't necessarily need quote unquote fixed. If it works for your family, great. If it doesn't, then change something. So I've really enjoyed following her account. She just offers us so much wisdom and insight today. So I'm so excited to have her on. We're going to jump into the interview. All right, everyone. I have Taylor Kulik here, and I'm so excited to talk to her. I've been following her for a while now, and it's been very reassuring for me. As you guys know, I've been on a sleep journey with Jovi, and we have tried sleep training in the past, and I didn't really follow fully through just because, I was just like, this isn't working for me. And so we did have a rough patch, and just following Taylor has been really reassuring. She's a holistic sleep coach and just offers a different side to what so many of us have been told or been led to believe that we have to do in order to make our kids sleep. So I'm so excited that she is here to talk to us today. So thank you so much, Taylor, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. So I'd love for you just to start by telling us, how did you get into this field and how did you become a holistic sleep coach?
Sure. So I had my first child in the summer of 2017. So she's 4 now. And I thought we were going to be sleep training. I didn't really understand how babies were meant to sleep, but I had kind of just heard the things that most parents, at least in the States and maybe Canada, and, more, it's a lot of countries now that kind of the sleep training is the norm. But that's what I was hearing. I really wasn't hearing a lot of helpful information about realistic expectations for baby sleep. So my daughter was a really challenging sleeper. She actually slept pretty well for the first couple of months. She would sleep in her pack and play, which was at the foot of our bed, and she would wake up a couple times a night to nurse, but she would nurse and go right back to sleep, and I would just transfer her, and it was just beautiful. And I actually sometimes thought that was rough at the time, and I didn't really know what was coming. And there were a few nights when she was probably 2 months old that she slept through the night. And so I thought, we've made it. We've hit, we have a good sleeper now. Right. And then 4 or 5 months came and everything went downhill. And by 6 months, I was desperate. I was miserable. I had tried a couple of different sleep training techniques, and nothing really felt right. She would not sleep in the crib. She would only sleep next to me in the bed or when I was holding her. I was falling asleep, rocking her, standing up, rocking her in the rocking chair because I was terrified of bringing her into bed with me. So it was just a really, really stressful time. To be honest, like, I've blacked out a lot of that time because it was traumatizing for me in a way. Like I didn't hold her as much as I really wanted to. I didn't let her nap on me because I was afraid I was breaking the rules and I was creating bad habits for her. And so at some point around 6 months, I remember my husband just said to me, just keep her in bed with us. Because we were both miserable and sleep deprived. He was sleep deprived too, because he was in the room with us. And I just felt like I couldn't do that. I was so terrified. I'd been told that there was no way that you can safely bed share. But at the same time, we were like so sleep deprived that we couldn't function during the day. And I was working at the time. I was working part-time. I wasn't on maternity leave at 6 months. So, I pulled her into bed with me. I kept her there and she slept wonderfully. Like, yes, she woke up a couple of times to nurse, but then she went right back to sleep and I barely woke up, and it was just like the rest is history. So then I started, because I felt a lot of shame when I had to bed share. I felt like I was failing her. Like, sleep is such a big topic when you're a new parent. And when you can't answer the question of, is your baby sleeping through the night? Or you can answer, but it's not like the ideal answer.
Shut
or
up.
Is your baby, yeah. Or is your baby sleeping in the crib? I mean, it feels like, is that like the main indicator of how I'm performing as a parent or how well off my child is? Because if so, then I'm failing her. And so that is really how I felt at that point. But somehow I got connected with the work of Professor James McKenna, who is an amazing, he's retired now, but he's an amazing advocate for safe bed sharing. His website is cosleeping.nd.edu, and he has a ton of information about safe bed sharing and research supporting bed sharing. And I had never come across this before. And I'm an OT, so I'm an occupational therapist by background. So sleep is something that is like within my scope of practice. And yet I had never learned about this. And so my world was just really changed because I realized, oh, I'm actually doing something that a lot of parents do. And there's a way to make it more safe. And there's a lot of benefits to it. And so I started kind of coming out of this like shame bubble that I was in. And then I got connected somehow with Lauren Heffernan, who is the founder of Isla Grace Sleep. And she has a holistic sleep certification program. And I was just really resonating with everything she was saying. And so I decided to take her certification program. And it was absolutely life-changing for me in many ways, not just with sleep, because the program was not just about sleep. It's also about parenting and emotions and setting boundaries and just like your relationship with your child. And so that was really life-changing for me. And that's when I kind of shifted my career goals from like working as an OT in a hospital to like, wow, I just actually really want to support new parents who are struggling, whether they're actually struggling with sleep or they're just struggling with their unrealistic expectations for sleep or they're struggling with pressure to sleep train. But I want to support those parents who don't want to sleep train. And so that kind of just became my thing and my focus. And that's where I'm at now.
You said so many things in there that I'm like, yes, we have to talk about this. Like unrealistic expectations. That's one of them. We're going to take a quick break from this episode to talk about hydration, right? Everybody knows what hydrating is, but have you heard of prehydration, being prehydrated? It is so important, and that is what SOS hydration is all about. The idea is that if you start your day and you prehydrate, that you're going to be more energized and efficient going forward. Unlike competitors, it's not just a solution for when you're dehydrated after it already occurs, but rather preventing it in the first place. And people who prehydrate are healthier, they have increased concentration, which, come on, we all need a little bit more of that. You have more energy, we all need more of that, and experience less headaches, have better sleep, and experience overall improved performance. 1 8-ounce bottle gives you the equivalent hydration of 24 ounces. That's 3 times the amount. It can come in a packet or in a ready-to-drink bottle. One thing that I love about it, since I've been breastfeeding, I feel like I get so thirsty, and I usually hit a point in my day where I'm like, I'm dehydrated. I've been chasing around a kid, trying to go about my day. And then I realize, oh my gosh, I haven't drank enough water yet. That usually occurs like midday to me. But with SOS hydration, drink it in the morning. You already start feeling fueled for the day and hydrated. So that has been so helpful. And hydration is so important for your breast milk production as well. You guys can find SOS Hydration at Walmart, CVS, or Whole Foods, or you can go to soshydration.com and get 20% off your first order. That's 20% off your first order at soshydration.com. The bed sharing thing, I felt that as well, because after similar, I think that there's like, correct me if I'm wrong, like around 2 months, babies do sleep great. They go through this phase, because I remember a few times she slept 8-10 hours and I'm like, oh, we have a good sleeper. This is perfect. And then shit hit the fan, and you're like, oh, great. This is not what I thought. So for me, the roughness started from, it was basically 9 to 11 months. That was the hardest for us. Because before we could always soothe her and put her back down. But then for some reason at 9 months, we couldn't put her down. Like she would start tensing up her body, start screaming. I'd bring her into bed, but then she thought it was playtime and she'd like kick and twirl and like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this child is never going to sleep. But the expectation is she's 9 months old. She should be sleeping. Like she should be sleeping through the night, or waking up 1, maybe 2 times. And that's kind of the expectation that is set. Whereas, I have an 11-month-old now and she's waking up basically, I think 3 times a night. Nurses goes right back down. And so there were a lot of times where I ended up bed sharing because of desperation. In the beginning, when she was 3 months old, we were bed sharing. And a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, you have to be so careful. And like, basically then my husband's scared. He's like, I don't like it when you bring her into bed. Everybody's freaking out about it. Like he's worried about it. And I'm like, babe, this is literally the only way I'm able to get a few hours of sleep.
Right.
Like, and it's more dangerous for you to fall asleep in the rocking chair. And so I looked up safe bed sharing. I followed the guidelines and I didn't love it because I'd be like stuck in this weird position, but at least I was able to like sleep. So I would love to talk a little bit about that because I know so many parents listening have been there, or they're in the position where they're like, I'm not sleeping. And maybe the babies, they're not sleep training and they're desperate. But they're terrified to bring the baby into bed with them. Because I shared one thing on Instagram once and people were like, you shouldn't be sharing about bed sharing. This is how kids die. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I'm sure you hear it all the time.
All the time. I've been called horrible names. I've been called a baby killer.
Oh my gosh.
I get threats. It doesn't happen as much anymore, but especially when I first started speaking out about it. Yeah. So here's the thing. Bed sharing isn't right for every family, but then neither is crib sleeping. Parents and babies, specifically breastfeeding mothers, have been bed sharing or sharing a sleep surface with their babies since the beginning of time. This is the biological norm. So something that's really important to understand is that, and it's so complicated, I'm just going to make it really simple, but babies are like, they're meant to be next to mom. They're not meant for separation. And so some babies are going to have an easier time. Some babies are more easygoing. They're going to have an easier time just sleeping in their crib. And some babies aren't going to sleep in their crib. There is no way around that. All babies are different. They have different temperaments, different personalities, different proximity needs. So what always kills me is like the people that come commenting on my safe bed sharing posts and they're like, I have 2 kids and I, did X, Y, and Z and all you have to do is do the work and they will sleep in their crib and blah, blah, blah. And like, no, I did all of those things too. And neither of my children did that because my children are very sensitive and they're very high needs and they're not easygoing kids. I don't have easygoing children. I have 2 children. Neither of them are easygoing. So all of that to say, I could go into that for like an hour, but all of that to say, there is a way to safely bed share. And so when we're talking about crib sleeping versus bed sharing, what the conversation typically looks like is people that are like anti-bed sharing. They are putting crib sleeping, or we could say like the ABCs of sleep, which is like alone on your back in the crib.
Right.
They're putting that scenario on a pedestal and acting as if it is the only safe way for babies to sleep, and there are no risks associated with it. And then they're blasting bed sharing. But really, that's not the entire conversation, because not only does crib sleeping have some amount of risk to it, because everything in life, everything in parenting has risks. Mm-hmm. Our job as parents is to do risk-benefit analyses and choose which set of risks we want to take or need to take in some situations. In some situations, bed sharing is not a choice. In some situations, it is literally the only way that parents can make it through that tough time. And so we have to, when we're having this conversation, we really have to have a well-rounded conversation and also talk about, okay, well, what are the risks of crib sleeping? For some families, there's really low risk because their baby will sleep in the crib, but we always have to assess the risk of like and I don't even like to say the word risk because I'm not trying to imply that crib sleeping is risky inherently. But what I am saying is that sometimes sleeping in the crib can cause problems and moms don't even realize. So like if you are crib sleeping, it could impact the breastfeeding relationship if you are also sleep training. So that's just an example. Some parents have to sleep train to get their baby to sleep in the crib, and that could impact breastfeeding. It could impact milk production, and it could cause them to end their breastfeeding relationship earlier than they desired. The other thing is that we know babies need to be near mom. It's protective. There are so many benefits to bed sharing, and part of that set of benefits is that mom and baby they react in a physiological way to each other. So mom helps to regulate baby's breathing patterns, helps to control the temperature, etc. And so we have to wonder what is happening then when baby is not in sensory proximity. And this doesn't only have to be with bed sharing. Like baby can be in sensory proximity to mom and get those same benefits, even like when they're on a separate sleep space, but they're like right next to the bed, like they're within arm's reach. But if the crib is across the room or in another room, they're not getting those benefits. And so again, I'm not saying that's necessarily bad and you have to bed share, but we have to consider all of those things because otherwise it's really just not a well-rounded conversation. So a lot of the research that people will cite to say you should never bed share, it's very safe, it's very unsafe, it's dangerous, is super biased and flawed. And the main reason for that is that when they're doing this statistical analysis and saying, okay, well, if you bed share with your baby, you have I don't even know what the number, I think I've heard 5 times or maybe 4 times risk of your baby dying from SIDS or something like that. That data is flawed because it's lumping in all co-sleeping situations together and labeling it bed sharing. Right. And so what that means is that moms who have fallen asleep, and dads too, so parents who have fallen asleep with their baby on the couch, in the rocking chair, those are labeled bed sharing deaths.
The same intoxicated, is true, right?
Intoxicated, yes. Under the influence of drugs, yes, absolutely. Those are all just labeled bed sharing. Also, any unsafe situation. So it could be bed sharing, but those parents weren't given safe bed sharing guidelines. So they were sleeping with blankets all around baby's head or big pillows or something like that, which caused a suffocation risk. Those are all just lumped into bed sharing. And it is very rare that safe versus unsafe situations are considered separately. Mm-hmm. When we do have research that considers those separately and looks at safe bed sharing risks, so those situations where parents were following safe bed sharing guidelines versus unsafe situations, the bed sharing safely situations were not significantly more risky than the safe crib sleeping situations. So parents, I think, need to know that. They need to know because you can manipulate data. And I'm not saying that they're manipulating. I'm just saying that it's a bit of cherry picking. It's a bit of just like flawed analyses that leads us to this conclusion of bed sharing should never ever happen. And it's not taking into account that the majority of breastfeeding mothers will bed share at some point in time, even if they don't intend to, just because of the physiological and biological design of getting sleepy while breastfeeding and breastfeeding in the middle of the night. And it just makes sense. And so first, I think that's the most important thing for parents to know is that the research does not really support that bed sharing leads to more deaths when done safely. But then the question is, well, how are parents supposed to know how to bed share safely if we're withholding that information for them and from them and just saying never ever do it? So that's my thing. That is my what's the word I'm looking for? My pedestal that I'm going to stand on, and I'm going to shout about it all day long, because it is dangerous to withhold safe bed sharing guidelines from sleep deprived parents when it might be their only option, because they're going to bed share anyways. So don't we want to mitigate risk? Don't we want to help them be as safe as they possibly can? Because you can't just shout to a struggling parent who can't get their baby to sleep in the crib. You can't just shout at them and say, no, don't do that. It's bad. You're going to harm your baby, because then they just feel shame and they feel isolation, and it becomes secretive. So they don't want to tell anybody, because then they're ashamed and they don't want their child to get taken away. They don't want to get reprimanded, but they don't know that there's a way to safely bed share. So they're likely not bed sharing safely. Yeah, so that's my thing. I mean, the research actually shows, so from research from the Lullaby Trust Foundation shows that 90% of I think they call it co-sleeping, but that includes bed sharing. 90% of co-sleeping deaths are preventable with education about safe bed sharing. Mm-hmm. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Right. And like you said, it's frustrating that information is withheld because that's kind of what I was taught too, was don't bed share, even though I know my mom did it with me and my sister. I actually crawled in bed with my parents till I was 9. So, and forever. But yeah, I remember just always sleeping with them as a kid. But my dad would say that my mom would nurse us to sleep in bed. And if he rolled a different way, my mom's elbows were there, pushing him away. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's she would be asleep and making sure I wasn't rolling on you guys at the same time. I want to share with you one of my favorite companies that I've partnered with, and that is Genexa. They make clean medicine made with the same active ingredient that you need, but without the artificial ones that you don't. No artificial sweeteners, preservatives, dyes, parabens, or common allergens. The products are made with the clean, inactive ingredients. And Genexa is the first clean medicine company. I not only use it now for Jovi, oh my gosh, last month, you guys already know she was teething, not sleeping, just going through so much. And we used the kids' fever and pain relief for her. And I felt confident giving it to her, knowing that she was getting the active ingredient to help her feel comforted, but it wasn't full of nasty chemicals that are in a lot of our medicines in our cabinets. And then Vito and I use it too. We've been starting to replace things in our cabinets with the Genexa products, just knowing that we're not adding nasty toxins to our bodies. So you know that we need to that we always try to eliminate those. And we want our medicine to help us feel better. And we don't want all that added unnecessary crap in there. And that is why Genexa is so amazing. It was founded by 2 dads that were on a mission to make clean medicines. So whether you need to manage pain, allergies, or just the common cold, Genexa treats the same symptoms as the leading brands. And they have everyday essential medicines for adults, kids, and infants that cover a variety of health issues so that the whole family is covered. It's real medicine, and it is made clean. Start cleaning out your medicine cabinet today. Go to genexa.com/mamas for 20% off your first purchase. Go to genexa.com/mamas for 20% off your first purchase. That's genexa.com/mamas. But you said at the beginning, so this is from the beginning of time. It's very biologically normal. And this information about not bed sharing is newer and more of the Western society, whereas the majority of the world, that's still how they operate. So I feel like that's something to take into consideration too, that moms have been doing this forever.
Yeah. And it's a very like you said, it's a very Western centric idea. And it's also privileged. The assumption that every family has a large enough house with separate rooms, and even not separate rooms, but just enough space to have separate sleep surfaces for everybody, including baby, is very privileged and Western centric. My husband is from Poland. He was raised in Poland and he moved here when he was like 7, but he told me that they lived in a small apartment, maybe a 1-bedroom apartment so his immediate family with his 2 siblings, and also his grandparents. And he said that he bed shared until they moved. He bed shared with his grandfather until he moved when he was 7. He moved to the States. And he said that is the norm there, is that like they wouldn't have had enough space in their apartment to put a crib next to a bed. They wouldn't have had that space. And that is how he said most people there live. So we have to take that into consideration. It's very privileged to assume that everybody even has the space to bed share.
Yeah.
Or not bed share, crib sleep.
Yeah, that's so true. So we kind of touched on like what is normal, because I mean, before you were saying like every kid's individual needs are so different. But there almost seems to be this set of guides of like what's normal and what's not. Like being told that, hey, your baby's 9 months old, she should not be waking up this much, and things like that. So is there a quote unquote normal? Because I know in the beginning it's normal, and not only normal, but very healthy for babies to wake up. They need to wake up in the middle of the night. Like that's good. Until what point? Then there comes a point where it's like, nope, they shouldn't anymore. So we're told. So is there like some quote unquote normalcies of sleep, and maybe where there's things that are really, really not normal, that there could be other issues going on?
Yeah. So there aren't really any concrete norms, but there are things that I look at and I kind of call them red flags. So I say, okay, this is, there's a lot that's within the range of normal. There's really no timelines on anything like this. And that's the thing. I would first say, just throw out all of those rules that you've heard, like your baby should be sleeping through the night by 6 months, or once they hit 10 pounds, they don't need night feeds, any garbage like that. I mean, honestly, that's what it is. It's garbage. There's no data, no research to prove any of that. They're just these, these random numbers and timelines that just cause parents more stress, and they're not accurate. So there's not any like concrete norms of like, okay, my baby is 9 months old, they should be waking 2 times only. Like that's just not how it works. And we can talk a little bit more about that, but there are some things that I would say are like questionable. Like this seems to be outside of what I would consider normal, and I would consider it a red flag. And I would want to explore a little bit more and see if we can figure out what's going on. So babies really under the first year, or, within the first year of life, waking is very normal. That also doesn't mean that it's not normal if your baby isn't waking. So like if your baby at 6 months or 9 months is sleeping through the night and you haven't sleep trained them, that's fine. You don't have to be concerned about that. But if your baby is waking 2, 3, 4 times a night, that also is likely still normal, and it's not a concern. So there's a wide range of normal. Just because, one 6-month-old is waking 1 time and one 6-month-old is waking every 2 or 3 hours, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem with that 6-month-old who's waking every 2 to 3 hours, because all babies are different. And really, if you think about it, we all wake at night. Most of us adults wake at night too. The difference is that most of us have coping mechanisms and we're able to self-regulate. And so we don't need to go wake our partner or our mom to help us calm us back to sleep. We are able to do that ourselves. And some of us struggle with it too, for whatever reason. We might have health issues. We might be stressed. And so to imagine that even we can struggle sometimes with putting ourselves to sleep or getting back to sleep in the middle of the night, to have these expectations for our children and our babies that they would never be able to have to struggle with that, and that they would always just sleep 12 hours at night, is just really unrealistic and unreasonable, because we're all human, and they just need more help than we do for the most part, because they're so new to the world. So waking at night is normal. Most babies in those first 6 months or so, I would say waking 2 to 4 hours every 2 to 4 hours is pretty normal. Some babies are going to wake more. And then most babies are going to go through phases where they have a developmental leap, or they're learning a new motor milestone like crawling or standing or sitting, or they're teething, or they're ill, or they have like a cognitive milestone that they're learning, or maybe they're going through separation anxiety. So there's all of these developmental things that are happening that can and often do cause sleep disruption. And so what that might look like is that maybe your baby pretty consistently wakes every 3 hours or so for a feed. And maybe not consistently. That's not necessarily a sign that something's going on if your baby isn't super consistent. But they're usually then feeding and going right back to sleep. But then maybe they hit like a week where they're waking every hour, or they're waking every 45 minutes, and they're super restless. And they just seem uncomfortable, and it's harder to settle them back to sleep. That is still normal if it's a phase, as long as, we would hope that at some point they would be going back to their more like normal patterns, where they're sleeping a little bit longer, and then they're getting back to sleep more easily. So when I'm looking at sleep, I don't just look at how often a baby's waking. I also look at the quality of their sleep and what is going on when they wake. So how often are they waking, but then are they easily is mom or dad able to easily settle them back to sleep? Are they falling asleep quickly? What are they doing when they wake? Are they screaming? Do they seem uncomfortable? Are they in pain? Those are all things to look at, because it could just be that your baby's going through a growth spurt and they're just waking every hour to feed for a few nights, but they're going right back to sleep and they're not uncomfortable. But it could be that your baby has a food intolerance and they have gas, and that's why they're waking every hour and they're screaming and crying and hard to console. So that, to me, if there's like any clear signs of discomfort, that's a red flag to me. It could be teething related for sure. It could be illness related. But if you've ruled those things out, or it's lasting a really long time, things we would want to consider is feeding challenges, tongue ties, nutritional deficiencies like iron deficiency, food intolerances, and reflux, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But generally, I would say if your baby, this is kind of my rule, and this is not like a hard and fast rule. But generally, like if you have a baby that has never slept like a 2.5 or 3 hour stretch in their entire life, that's a red flag to me. And I would wonder what's going on. Also, if you have a baby that not just for like a few days or like even a week or two, but like longer than that, they just seem really hard to settle at night, or they seem uncomfortable, that's something worth exploring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's so many things it could be. And I feel like that's also the information that's kind of not given to parents.
Right. They just say sleep train them.
Right. Right. And so there might be an issue, or if they're like, my kid doesn't sleep train, or this might be going on. It's like, there could be so many different things happening that are affecting that. So that's really good information to have. I would love to talk about bad habits, if there are bad habits, because I've also been told nursing my daughter to sleep is a bad habit. And I tried at the beginning to be like, okay, we're going to sleep, eat, play, right? Mm-hmm. That's the pattern. That's what we're going to do. But I don't know. I just nursed her to sleep all the time, and we still do. And it works for us. My husband's only worried, like which I haven't been like gone overnight from her ever. Actually, I have. I work as a doula, so there's been a few times I've been on call in overnight, and he had it a little bit rough, but just kind of being told, well, you don't want her to only rely on you to sleep. Like, she's never going to learn how to sleep on her own, because she's using you as a pacifier basically to go to sleep. Is that a bad habit? Are there bad habits? And are those things that we need to break?
Yeah. So this is like, as you were asking me this question, I have like 5 directions I want to go here, because it's so complicated. As I think everything with sleep and parenting is super complicated, and society tends to dumb it down a little bit and make it super simple. And so it's kind of like dispelling all of those myths and like beefing it up so that we can actually like appreciate how complex it is. But so no, there's not bad habits. I don't think there's bad habits. we all have things that, sleep associations. We all have things that we like to do before bed, or maybe we need our pillow just a certain way, or, we need to sleep with socks on or something like that. We all have those things. Some of us still sleep with sound machines and essential oils going. But for some reason, when it comes to babies, it's called a bad habit. And more interestingly it's the parent-led interventions, like the things that require parents, a caregiver, to do the work, like rocking and breastfeeding and things like that are considered the bad habits. Whereas like a snoo isn't considered a bad habit. A pacifier isn't considered a bad habit. So I just think that's really interesting when you just take a step back and kind of analyze how that works in society. But there's no bad habits. Whatever is working for you is great. It might become a bad habit to you if it just stops feeling okay for you. Like if it becomes something that you just can't do anymore. Like, I've worked with families that they're still rocking their 25-pound toddler, and they're too heavy and they're exhausted and they just don't want to rock their toddler anymore. And they're having to rock their toddler for 45 minutes to get them to sleep. And so then there's like 10 things we could analyze there as well. Because one, like, is it just the rocking that you want to change? Or what if it didn't take 45 minutes to rock your child to sleep? What if we could figure out how to make it only take 15 minutes to rock your child to sleep? Then would you be okay with it? So there's a lot of different things we can explore there too. But we can always work to shift those patterns of support. But I think what's important to understand is that most babies do need support to get to sleep. Though I always say the parents, the moms that wrote the quote unquote mommy blogs about, 10 steps to get your baby sleeping through the night, or follow this perfect schedule and your baby will sleep by themselves. Those moms had easygoing babies who slept well. Those moms did not have, and that's not the norm. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that's abnormal. It's just a type of temperament, and it's not going those strategies aren't going to work for the rest of babies who are not as easygoing, or who have a harder time and need more support to get to sleep. So one thing that I think is very important for parents to understand is that there are this is simplified, but there are two kind of groups of babies, and this can change, like they can switch from group to group, but we have some babies who are signalers, meaning when they wake up, they signal for support. They signal for a parent to get them back to sleep and to help them. Whereas other babies are more natural soothers. And what that means, and this kind of goes into another topic of self-soothing, but what the term soothers, a self-soother, actually means is that baby wakes and does some sort of soothing behavior when they're calm, to keep them calm and to get themselves back to sleep. And they don't always signal out. They're able to just get themselves back to sleep. This does not mean that they're like crying and they soothe themselves and then fall back asleep. There's no crying involved. They just go back to sleep. And so, we can hypothesize that the babies that are soothers are probably more easygoing. The babies that are signalers are not quite as easygoing. And it really, like, you can't change your baby if they're a signaler. You can't really change them to be a soother, because it's more of a temperamental issue. It's not an issue, but it's more of an issue of temperament. And so all of that to say, some babies are just signalers. Some babies are going to signal, and it's a good thing that they're signaling to you, because they'll continue to signal to you when their signals work, when their cries get their needs met, when they know they can rely on a caregiver to meet their needs. And so that's not a bad thing. It's just that's what they're meant to do. And a lot of babies aren't really capable of like the whole laying them down drowsy but awake thing and them just falling asleep on their own. And it can drive parents insane to think that that's like the gold standard and that every baby should be able to do that. I know it drove me insane. I thought, what's wrong with my baby that I can't lay her down drowsy but awake? Like I'm failing her, or there's something wrong with her. Why can't she do this? Well, it's because most babies cannot do that without letting them cry it out. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I feel like I got way off track. What question did you ask me?
No, I'm asking about bad habits. Like, if they're signaling to you, it's not a bad habit. That's just how some babies are. And I think what you're saying, go ahead.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to say here was that, there's this idea that we have to teach our babies how to be independent and put themselves to sleep independently and soothe themselves. And first of all, self-soothing is a myth. Babies aren't designed to self-soothe. They are not capable of self-regulating. I should say self-regulating, because I just talked about the soothers who can. So what self-soothing means is babies that are capable of keeping themselves in a calm state when they're already calm, and maybe putting themselves back to sleep. But that is different than what the sleep training world talks about when they're saying you need to teach your baby to self-soothe by leaving them to cry for however long. That's not what the Tom Anders actually is the one who created that term, self-soothing. That's not what he meant by self-soothing. So what we should be saying is self-regulating, which is when you're in a child is in a hyper aroused state. They're upset, they're crying. The expectation is that we need to teach them how to self-regulate back down to a calm state, but babies are not capable of self-regulating. They are wired to co-regulate with a calm and responsive caregiver. And so, I just always like to encourage parents that when you feel like you're failing your child because you are supporting them to sleep every time they wake, and you're rocking and you're breastfeeding and you're snuggling, and they're not doing it on their own, a lot of parents think, well, they're failing their child in some way, or they're not teaching them a necessary skill that they need to be independent. But really what you're doing is you are teaching them. You're teaching them how to self-regulate, because first, the way that we teach our babies that is we first do it for them. So we're first co-regulating with them. And that means for our new babies, that means we're doing basically all of it, because they are so new and helpless. And as they get a little bit older, they might take on some of that, but they're still there with us, and we're supporting them through it. And I like to think of it as, very simplistically, they're borrowing our calm. We're showing them how to be calm. Maybe we're taking deep breaths, but either way, we try to be calm and regulated. And that's what helps them to calm themselves down. And in time, and this is time, like years and years and years and thousands of co-regulation experiences, that is how a baby learns to eventually have those self-regulation tools on their own. They're watching us regulate. They're watching what we do and how we stay calm. And so by rocking your baby to sleep and nursing them to sleep and doing all of the things, you are building their brain. You're literally modeling for them how to do that, how to regulate. You're doing it first with them, and then backing away a little bit at a time as it feels right, as it's age and developmentally appropriate. And so, yeah, that's just a really big misunderstanding especially within the sleep training world.
Yeah.
Leaving your baby alone to cry doesn't teach them any skill. It just doesn't. And I know that's a hard thing for some people to hear. And I'm not saying that to make you feel bad, because I've done that. I did that with my daughter because I thought I had to. But I think it's so important for parents to know that if you are doing that, it's not teaching them a skill, and it's not something that's like a rite of passage. You don't have to do this in order to teach them a skill.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, that's something, again, I was told a lot is, well, you need to teach her how to self-soothe. And by following your account, I follow Isla Grace, just a lot of accounts like that. I've learned that it's something that they develop into. It's not
right.
a skill of, mm-hmm. I have to learn this skill. It's a developmental milestone that they will hit when they're ready, when they have reached that point, basically, which is different for every baby. I feel like the conversation with you is so good because just you touching on how every single baby is different. Because even when you talk to different parents, talking to my sister, her oldest son was such a terrible sleeper. It was so hard. It was her first kid. She was like, my second kid, she was so sick postpartum. She co-slept until she was 9 months. And then one day she laid her in the crib and she slept 12 hours. And she's been her best sleeper yet. And then her third was a normal sleeper, a little rough here and there, but whatever, Each one of her kids was different, and she didn't do necessarily different things. She had to adapt to the kid. But almost every single person that you talk to that has multiple kids, they're different. I interviewed a lady a couple months ago. Her first kid, great sleeper. Her second kid, horrible. She's it was just awful for a long time. And he's 2 now, and still a lot of times will wake up in the middle of the night and want her. And, she's it's something that we've just learned. We did the same things for both kids. It didn't work. So we tried different things, and kids have different needs, just like humans do, just like we do. And I feel like that's such a good message, because this one size fits all for everything in motherhood is just such a disservice to parents.
Exactly. And for some reason, the sleep training world is very one size fits all. And you know, the other thing, so you mentioned, you know, kids all have different needs, and that's true. And even one child, their needs can vary so much from day to day or night to night. So, you know, just because you have a 12-month-old who one night was able to get themselves to sleep on their own and maybe was sleeping really well, maybe the next night they've had a hard day, maybe they're feeling a little stressed, maybe they felt like they didn't get as much connection, maybe they're teething, and they might need more support to get to sleep that night. And that doesn't necessarily mean that something is wrong with them. And so, you know, we have to have that flexibility and acknowledge that there's going to be variability. Like our babies are not robots. They're going to have their hard days and their bad days just like we do. They're going to have days where they're doing amazing and they're happy and they're independent. And then they're going to have days where they're more clingy and needy and they need more support. And, you know, the other thing you mentioned was that, you know, this idea of like self-soothing is more developmental, and it is, but it is also something that we do teach. And the way we teach is to be responsive. And what that looks like is going to vary differently for every child, caregiver, dyad, because there are some babies that are just going to have a more easy time with those self-soothing and self-regulating skills. And there are some babies that are going to need a lot more support for longer. But we do teach them by doing it with them. And, so that's just something like we all probably know adults who have very poor self-regulation skills. I'm one of them. Like, I'm always honest about that. I was not really co-regulated with as a child. And I have a very difficult time self-regulating. And that's something that I've had to do a lot of work on. And we all probably know adults like that are just like quick to like explode, or like something little happens and they're just like so stressed and so overwhelmed. And a lot of times these are the adults that they didn't have a lot of those co-regulation experiences growing up with kids. So, you know, I like to tell parents, like, we do have a really important role, and we don't have to be perfect. Parenthood is not about chasing perfection and always responding like within a second to your baby's cries, but it is about just doing the best you can and trying to be attuned to your baby and their needs and be responsive as consistently as you can, but also giving yourself grace that you're not going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm. Right. It definitely feels far from perfect.
Yeah.
I feel like even when you're doing the best you can, it can be tough. It's Jovi, she's 11 months and she's in such a fun stage right now. Like, she's learning so much. She's exploring. It's like so cool just watching her. Like, was folding laundry the other day and she's like trying to put a shirt on her head and trying to put a shoe on her foot. Mm-hmm. And it's like so cool watching her see these skills that it's like, oh, she actually knows what to do with that. And pointing to her belly button and her eyes and stuff like that. So it's so fun. I do dread nights a little bit because I crawl into bed. I'm like, oh, my bed is so comfortable. And usually just when I'm falling asleep, she's up for the first time.
Yeah.
But it has gotten better. Like I said, there was those 2 months of just like hell. And now, I basically go in there, I nurse her, she passes back out. It takes like 5 minutes and she's back to sleep. So I don't mind that. But I do see how, like, when you're in that tough stage, like, it's just, you feel desperate for anything, whether it's sleep training or bed sharing or whatever. It's like, I cannot do this anymore. Like, it's so hard. And then one thing that I was trying to remind myself of in that was like, I felt like it was just hard for me. Like, that everybody else's babies were sleeping. Like, everybody else was probably just like, oh, it's okay. I'm just going to get up and nurse them. They'll go back to sleep, whatever. And I'm like, why is this so hard for me? But it's hard for everyone.
Totally.
I'm like, we're all in this together.
We're all doing it together. And I think, something that I think is something I get a lot is people come to me and they're like, well, you don't understand. Like, you're promoting parents to be sleep deprived, and you're like, you'll get it. Like, you would want to sleep train too if you were as sleep deprived as I was. And I just like to tell parents, like, I've been there. I have a 15-month-old who probably for almost half of his life, because he's had some health issues, has woken up every 45 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And like his first 5 months of life were miserable. He would only sleep on my chest if I was upright. So sometimes he wouldn't even let me sit down and like lay back on the bed. I would spend hours every night, like standing up, rocking him, falling asleep. Like it was miserable. And we bed shared, but he had breathing issues and tongue ties. And, we had a really tough recovery process with that. So those were things that were out of my control because I could do all of the like things in the world, the foundational stuff, the scheduling stuff, the routines. But what it boiled down to was a health issue that was like, I want to be there to support him. Sleep training wasn't going to address that. And then after that, we started having some better stretches of sleep. And then when he was like 10 or 11 months, he developed a food sensitivity that he hadn't had before to cow's milk protein. And he had severe colic every time we would have milk. And so that lasted for a while. And he would be screaming for 3 hours at night and nothing I could do would console him. And then we finally, I figured out the food sensitivity stuff, went on an elimination diet and that got better. But then he has had like really rough patches of teething where he's up every 45 minutes and like won't be settled. So I get it. Like I have been sleep deprived. This is not like a, martyrdom type thing. Like, oh, you just need to like not get sleep and that's your role as a mom. Like, that's not what I'm doing here. What I'm saying is that, if you feel like you need to sleep train, go for it. I'm not stopping anybody from sleep training. I think every family needs to make the decision that they feel that feels right to them. But I do want parents to have all of the information to make that decision. And what parents do need to know is that if there is a true sleep issue, like your baby's waking every 45 minutes, there's a reason for that, most likely. And the reason is not a lack of sleep training. That's not the reason. A lack of sleep training is never the reason for sleep issues. So what I do with families is I try to explore the root cause of that sleep issue. And sometimes it's not a quick fix. Like in my situation, sometimes it's a time thing. Like it just takes a while. It takes some body work. It takes some rehab. It takes some healing time. It takes an elimination diet and some trial and error. But the thing is like, if your baby has a true sleep issue, sleep training isn't going to help them. And in fact, it can be dangerous. I have worked with families who their babies had tongue and lip ties that went unaddressed. And I was hearing their signs and their symptoms and the things they were telling me. And I said, my gut is telling me that this baby has a tethered oral tissue. And like one family in particular reached back out to me after our consult and just like thanked me and said, I think this baby was waking every hour or something and like was very unsettled and said, thank you so much. Like our doctors were dismissing us, but we finally got answers and she got diagnosed with a tongue tie. And our like the OT and the other people we were working with said that she needed to sleep on her belly to open her airway. She was actually having trouble breathing. And so when we're trying to lay these babies on their back in their crib and sleep train them and make them sleep alone, some of these babies actually have breathing issues and it can be legitimately harmful for them to just leave them alone while they're crying. And so, those are the harder things I think for parents to hear because they don't want to think that would happen to their baby, but it does sometimes. And I think we need to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. My daughter had a tongue and a lip tie that we got revised. But then as soon as we did move her when we moved her to her crib, she was like outgrowing her bassinet. The first night she rolled over on her belly and slept completely face down. And we're like, oh my God, she's sleeping completely face down. Like at least we have a breathable mattress. But my husband was like, I'm going to die. Like he's like, why is she sleeping face down? Now she doesn't sleep face down. She still sleeps like on her side or belly. Sometimes she flaps on her back. Is there like a thing with belly sleepers at all? Or is that just a normal thing? Just like,
so a lot of babies like to sleep on their belly. The technical like rule is that babies should sleep on their back or you should always place them on their back. And if they can roll into the belly position, then that's okay. But what that leaves out of the conversation is that for some babies that do have restricted airways from a tie or something like that, sleeping on the belly actually opens the airway. And so some babies will instinctively try to get to their belly to open their airway. And so for some babies, and I'm not, this isn't like advice, this isn't like a recommendation, but for some babies, it is safer for them to sleep on their belly or like on your chest, like, belly to chest, because that opens their airway more. So I would say if you have a baby that will not sleep on their back, this is what I always tell parents. If you have a baby that will not sleep on their back, but you find that they'll sleep better on their belly, then that is when I would really get them assessed by somebody that is knowledgeable about tongue ties and airway issues, because it could be that there's something going on there.
Mm-hmm. Before we dive into your courses and podcasts really quick, I just want to touch on routine and if routines are really important, or not.
Yeah. So, and talking here about routines, understanding the difference between a routine and a schedule. So a schedule is more talking about having a sequence of events happen, but at the same time each night. So like, a sleep schedule would be baby sleeps at 8 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 3 o'clock. I'm just naming out random numbers here. That is not important. I don't really encourage any parents of babies under 6 months old to have a schedule, because they usually will not do well on a schedule. But a routine is different in that it is a sequence of events or activities that tend to happen in the same time. So it's kind of like this rhythm, like this flow. And I do think that's important. So what we understand about the brain, even for us as adults, is that when we know what to expect, when we know what is coming, we feel less stress and we feel safer. And the same is true for our babies, especially because they don't have control over anything. They're just learning the world and they're really dependent on us. And they don't know what's happening. And so when we can implement some routines, especially sleep routines, to just help them know what to expect and understand that when XYZ happens, it's going to be bedtime soon, they can feel safer and it can reduce their stress. And ultimately, when we're talking about sleep and how we can support our babies to sleep, the most important thing we can do is create a sleep environment and a sleep space that is stress-free, and to help them minimize their stress as much as possible, because it's very difficult for anybody to get to sleep and to sleep well when they're stressed. So yes, creating routine can be really helpful in minimizing stress. And that doesn't have to be like a complicated or extensive routine. It can just be, as simple as things that you're already doing probably before your baby goes to sleep, but just making sure you are a little more intentional about the order of doing it and things like that. So it might just look like, it could be like 10 or 15 minutes. It might just look like maybe you put pajamas on, maybe you read a story, dim the lights, maybe you sing a specific song, and then nurse to sleep or rock to sleep, or, different families will have their different little things that they just like to do before bed and enjoy doing that they'll add in. But yeah, it doesn't have to be anything extensive, but it can be very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I find it helpful with her naps. She's a great morning napper. She is like ready to go down. We put the sleep sack on, read a couple books, nurse, and she loves it. The second nap, not so much. She'll go down, but it's like a little more tough. But I found routine to be helpful for us. The exact time thing hasn't been, we do it around the same time, but there also are times where we're like at dinner at our in-laws, or we are at something, and sometimes we'll leave early, like if she's really overtired or whatever. I'm not trying to stay out till midnight with her, because she just sleeps so much better if we, get her in her crib. And I found that that's hard. Like, you do have to adjust some things in your life, which is part of being a parent.
Right.
Like, a lot of things change and adjust. I don't like being out for her naps. Like, she will sleep in the car if like I'm running errands. But like, her first nap is so golden to me. It's so good. Like, I just want her to be at home in her crib, because that's when I can get stuff done. And so but I feel like routine has definitely helped. And the scheduling for me, I've found to be sometimes stressful, because I'm like, oh, it's this time. We got to do it right now.
Well, and it doesn't honor, your child's cues that they're giving you. And, it could be, and it's hard because like we can't control how long our baby naps for necessarily unless we're cutting the nap short. But like, if you look at these baby schedules that you find online, a lot of them are like, okay, baby's going to sleep 3 times a day and they're, 3 naps a day and each nap is going to be an hour and a half. I'm just making things up, but that's really how they are. Or like if they're on 2 naps, okay, they're going to take like an hour and a half to 2-hour nap each time. And they're going to wake at this time and then they'll be ready for bed at this time. But like the reality is that most babies are not going to sleep that perfect 2-hour nap every time. Right. They might do it sometimes, but then what happens when they have a 1-hour nap? Do you just stretch their wake window and make them wait until bedtime, or do you adjust for that? And so, there has to be room for flexibility for most babies, unless you have a super easygoing baby that just loves to sleep, then a schedule might be just fine. But if you have any other sort of baby, they're not going to do exactly what you want them to do by the schedule all the time. So there has to be some room for flexibility in honoring their cues and, their tired cues and acknowledging like how they slept the rest of the day. And that's going to impact what time they go to bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'd love for you to tell us about your courses and your podcast.
Yeah. So I have 2 sleep e-courses. They're both comprehensive, but I have an infant course and I also have a toddler course, which is, toddler is like 12 months and up. Infant is 12 months and under. But, basically, these are not like step-by-step one size fits all courses. I'm not going to give you like an approach, like some other larger sleep trainers will, because that's not the way my approach works. My approach is educating first on what to expect, what is normal, what is biological infant sleep look like, and then giving you lots of strategies and solutions for making changes that you need to, troubleshooting specific common challenges like false starts and early rises and short naps and things like that, but also just like helping you to feel empowered and knowing that like you can relax a little bit. Like it's okay if things aren't perfect. And here's how to get by. But my infant course is super comprehensive. I also have in that course, I have interviews with, I believe, 5 different professionals. It's over 8 hours of content total. But I have it's super holistic because we talk about mental health and nutrition for babies and breastfeeding, and co-regulation and tongue ties and all of that. And then I also have a toddler course, and I have a podcast called Let's Sleep on It, Reclaiming Parenthood. You can also just search for Taylor Kulik on Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. It's on Spotify too. And that is not just about sleep. I do talk about sleep on the podcast, but I also invite other guests and experts to talk about, just like parenthood and motherhood in general. And kind of the focus is on like doing things a little bit differently than the mainstream way of doing things. So parenting against the grain and some kind of unconventional ideas. And then you can always find me on Instagram. My handle is Taylor Kulik.
Awesome. And I'm going to include all of that in the show notes for everybody listening. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on and giving us your time, your energy, and your expertise here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. It was great.
Make sure that you go check out those links, share this with a tired mom who needs to hear it, and make sure you go follow Taylor to get all of her awesome content. And if you're listening, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast, share it, rate and review, and let me know who else you guys want to hear from. Let me know what topics you want, what guests you want, and I will do my best to try to make that happen. I hope you guys are having a great month. It's almost fall. I'm really excited for fall. It's really hot here this week. It's in the 90s. And I know I used to live in Vegas and it's like 1,000,000 degrees there, but I went for like a walk jog this morning and it thunderstormed all last night and it was only 75 when I went out, but it was so humid. It reminded me of like being on vacation somewhere tropical, and I was just drenched in sweat. It felt good. I haven't been the best at moving my body the last week. I've been really busy and tired. So I just needed to get out there today, made it happen, 20 minutes. But it was freaking hot. So I'm excited for the fall weather. That is one of my favorites. Getting into fall and winter. It's the best. I love being nice and cozy, and that is everything fall. I feel like I might need to go get like a pumpkin spice latte or something just to bring those vibes. I actually don't really like them, but for some reason, every single year, I just get one just to get one. Maybe I'll make like a pumpkin bread or muffins or something. That's where it's at. Send me your best recipes, guys. I'm ready for fall. So send me your favorite fall recipes, baking or soups, so I can start adding them to my Pinterest board and getting ready for everything fall. All right. Love you guys. I hope that you have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.